Order, order. Mr. John Pugh. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no, I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order, Mr. John Pugh.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure to see you there. I think I'm meant to begin by saying that this House, I beg to move this House is considered the subject of cities, regions and metro mayors. I think that's the way to do it. Can I also welcome the Minister to his post? I'm sure one of the joys he's looking forward to is responding to endless German debates. This one appears to have excited a certain amount of interest, albeit it's somewhat topical. We have a new government, and we have a newish agenda associated with that government. And there are two key themes which I'm personally quite keen on. One is devolution, and the other is the Northern Powerhouse, both of which I support in principle. We are, though, largely talking in England about devolution to city regions, and it appears to be wholly unclear, as many honourable members have already said in the Commons chamber, what's going to happen to other areas outside city regions. I mean, I understand city regions because they are essentially the rediscovery of what we used to call metropolitan counties, which were abolished almost as collateral damage when Mrs. Thatcher got rid of the GLC. She was so antagonised by signs across the road from County Hall that eventually decided they had to go. And in order to make it not seem personal and vindictive, she got rid of the metropolitan counties as well, just to prove the point. But still, there's always been a necessity for sub-regional bodies of one kind or other, and that was proved by the need to recreate the GLC as, in fact, the GLA, and to have a mayor's office associated as well. And it's proved also by the fact that the Met counties, in one form or another, more or less persisted. They persisted normally in most areas as four joint boards or authorities dealing with police, fire, transport and waste. That's what Mrs. Thatcher did. And I think what we're seeing now is almost a reversal of Thatcherism. I don't think the Minister is particularly comfortable with that, but I think that's what's actually happening. I mean, police authorities, which Mrs. Thatcher and the Conservatives following tried insistently to depoliticise by adding cohorts of magistrates to them in independence and so on, have now become politically accountable police commissioners. Not a proposal I'm particularly fond of, but nonetheless it's a politicisation. And there's a promise of power from Whitehall to what we learned to call our combined authorities, which have essentially replaced the joint boards and the Met counties before them. And the only real difference is we have indirect nomination rather than direct elections. So it does seem that governments are often trapped into a situation where they're forced to reinvent the wheel, because in a sense there's always a need for that sort of sub-regional structure to make the kind of big economic and transport decisions that are probably beyond the individual competence of any even quite sizable council. And these are the kind of decisions also that I think governments have learned can't be made particularly well, or to local satisfaction, by Whitehall. What is though really odd about the current proposals of the current government is the insistence that this sort of devolution requires something called a metro mayor, a Mr. Big, a kind of civic Mussolini. And that's quite different from having an effective council leader. It's quite different from having a figurehead, which many people see a need for in certain areas or for certain purposes. It's essentially the appropriation of executive power to one particular individual. Certainly.
Just on that point, is it also not true that there is a great deal of confusion about the real shape of these metropolitan areas and the metro mayors? And has he seen some of the research that suggests that this emphasis on the big cities, a big city of Leeds, big city of Manchester, actually will squeeze or have really deleterious effects on smaller towns and cities like my town of Huddersfield?
Well, I think that's a point I'll come on to later, but he's absolutely right in the point that he makes. The interesting thing is this isn't the sort of devolution that people have actually requested or want. There isn't a clamour up and down the northern cities and northern conurbations. No, let's have a Metro Mer. It's a government knows best model. And it's not just simply a government knows best model, it's a Procrustean model, because the Chancellor's made it quite explicit that proper devolution, full devolution that's worth anything, is going to come with that particular model. Now, I could accuse, if I was unkind, the government of dogmatism. I could accuse them of ideological stupidity, of blind prejudice and stuff like that, or even a predilection for civic Mussolini's. But genuinely, I'm struggling to follow their argument here. I really am. There is no evidence worldwide that all conurbations who have all-powerful mayors thrive any better or any worse than those that don't. I mean, some clearly do, but quite a lot don't. Governance is not always a decisive factor or a decisive factor at all. There is certainly no evidence around that one man alone always makes a better decision than a man or a leader surrounded by his peers or a group of adequately informed, able people. And there's an appreciable body of evidence that shows that once you invest power in a single decision maker, you're vulnerable to a number of different things. You're vulnerable to cronyism. That kind of accusation has been made against the Mayor of London. You're vulnerable long term, I think, to an element of corruption as decisions become less transparent. You're vulnerable to political obtuseness and people flying a kite. I think of things like Boris's Island Airport. And of course, you have the fact that collective decisions rather than individual decisions are always more transparent, they're more open to challenge, and they have to be argued for. I mean, it has to be said that they're not always quicker, and that may be the reason why the government is infatuated with the Metro Mer idea. But if quick decisions are actually necessary from a corporate body, normally most corporate bodies think of an intelligent scheme of delegation that enables them to deal with that particular problem. I mean, very few people around the room would argue that a President of the United States surrounded by advisors perforce and naturally makes better decisions than a Prime Minister of England with a cabinet that has to get things through Parliament. On Merseyside, we have a particular problem because from our point of view, it's essential that decisions that affect the whole region should have proper input from all parts of the region. All voices should be heard. The voice of Southport and Sefton and Wirral and St Helens is not simply all about Liverpool. And one person, however good that person may be, however qualified they may be, however sensitive they may be, is unlikely to be equally alert, equally caring, or equally bothered about all areas. And in my particular area, right on the margins of the Liverpool City region, we worry about precisely that, marginalisation. We're already in a borough which is controlled by no one elected in Southport or by no one belonging to a party that has been elected in Southport, and there's a genuine happiness with being in the council that we are, and we'll make representations later on in the parliamentary term about boundary changes and what could be done about that. But how much worse is it going to be for my particular constituency when not even a Sefton voice is involved in decisions that directly affect us? We then become a simply marginalised community. Our tourism, for example, could be overlooked in Liverpool's drive to boost its own tourist economy, and there doesn't seem an adequate restraint on that. In fact, following on from the previous intervention, in some ways, what we want is a better engagement with the areas immediately outside the city region. Very important to us is to find out what actually is going to happen in Lancashire, what is going to happen in the neighbouring authority next to us, the West Lancashire, which is a district which is in part highly dependent on the city region economy, but actually exiled from it, no part of it, and not able even to join it. We need to talk transport links with them, and it's not obvious by having a Metro Mer is at all of any assistance to us. It wouldn't be so bad, genuinely wouldn't be so bad, if as in the sort of Res Publica pamphlet, which backed the proposal of Devo Mank, if the prospect of a Metro Mer was presented as an option, something in the toolkit. But it's not. It's a precondition. And it's a precondition regardless of local opinion. It's a devolution. It's not devolution by demand. It's almost devolution as the Chancellor demands. And to that extent, it's got to be questioned. Now, I don't think these problems are unique to the area of Merseyside, or even unique to found in, just in Merseyside, Manchester and North West. You will find the same things in Tyneside, the same issues in Tyneside, the same issues in the Sheffield area, same issues in Birmingham. And the fact that Manchester has been such a success recently in terms of its devolution, is picked as an early candidate in devolution without a Metro Mer, proves how tangential the presence of a Metro Mer is to genuine devolution. So let me conclude by summarising the problem. We want devolution, just like the Scots, and it would be nice, of course, to have the same level of per capita funding. But the government's offer, as we've got it at the moment, is simply piecemeal. We're leaving many areas completely orphaned. We're patronising other areas by suggesting they can only have one particular form of governance, regardless of what the electorate actually do want. Otherwise, they will not get the funding that devolved areas will have. We're marginalising communities like mine in Southport within the city region. And what we're confronted with is a wholly unproven, unevidenced strategy. And the worst thing is, there's absolutely no opportunity for the people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of this devolution to have a view or to express a view on the template that the government offers them. That's not devolution, that's imposition.
The question is that this House has considered city regions and metro mayors. Now, just to help the House, the arrangements for these sittings in Westminster Hall are as follows. The debate finishes at 4:30 and 5:30, I apologise, and the SNP, Labour and Government Minister each get 7 minutes at the end of the debate. So I think colleagues can see there's very little time to be shared between 13 people. I'm very happy to call everyone, but it's going to be about 3 or 4 minutes. So I would just ask colleagues to bear that in mind. So whether they want only to make interventions entirely a matter for the House. Mr. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Sir David, and it's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship today, and may I congratulate the Honourable Member for Southport for bringing forward what is a very important debate, not just on city regions, metro mayors, but also, as he ably put in his speech, ultimately where devolution is taking and is leading us. Devolving decision-making process closer to communities and tackling our nation's historic north-south divide head-on as principles make perfect sense. Empowering the north to achieve its true potential will ensure that we do not surrender to the unyielding rise of London. And I say that, Sir David, because rather than dragging our capital down, we should be instead empowering the rest of the country to rise to the challenge. Britain is at its best when all our cities and regions have the freedom to champion their unique strengths in order to generate more highly skilled jobs and greater prosperity. And clearly, Sir David, it would be a mistake to restrict this offer of greater powers to a small elite club of metropolitan centres. Every region of the country must be free to seize the opportunity of controlling their own destiny. That is the only way that devolution can truly be successful. I am therefore delighted that the proposals for devolution, as we see them at the moment, will now consider, regardless of where they come from, will be considered much wider. And for me, the essence of, Sir David, of Conservative philosophy is not where you come from. It's not where you come from that matters. It's where you're going and what you can achieve in life that counts. And I think this is ultimately where the devolution argument has to lie. If I may, Sir David, after the excellent contribution for the member for Southport, I would just like to take this debate across the Pennines to focus the attention in my contribution on the impact of this devolution debate on the great county of Yorkshire and of my own city of York. As the historic heart of Yorkshire, the City of York is uniquely placed to benefit from the government's offer of devolution. We are fortunate enough to benefit from membership of two LEPs, and we are strategically linked with the economies of West Yorkshire, Sir David, but also the more rural hinterland of North Yorkshire and the East Riding. However, whilst it is true that parts of our economy are intertwined with West Yorkshire, our connections with the rest of North Yorkshire run far, far deeper. We share many of the essential services with North Yorkshire, and our proud heritage as the northern capital of both the Romans and the Vikings, as the City of York, provides us with a more intangible connection with the rest of the county. I do remember when the proposals were first mooted for combined authorities and they were first debated in this House. I, along with many other colleagues, voiced our concern about the lack of alternatives for places like York to take a different path to the one that was put forward for major cities. And I'm delighted the government looks set to deliver on this key commitment. And I sincerely hope that York will be able to achieve its ambition of working closely with its long-established partners, such as North Yorkshire and the East Riding, to deliver greater benefits for our local communities. The importance of York and North Yorkshire and the East Riding as a valuable counterweight to the competing interests of Leeds, Sheffield and Hull must not be overlooked. The new Conservative-led York Council, which now has a Conservative leader for the first time since the authority was created over 20 years ago, now has a great opportunity to make devolution work for our city and truly unlock York's potential. It has been made abundantly clear that the only way we can achieve a Yorkshire powerhouse and make sure that devolution percolates right the way through our great county is to dissolve the responsibilities for investment in our transport infrastructure. And when you look at transport infrastructure and the needs for investment, Sir David, you can look no further than the Northern Ring Road in my constituency, which provides the main access to key retail and employment and leisure sites. However, as the numbers of vehicles using this particular road have increased by more than half over the past decade, large stretches of this route are now at full capacity. So without further investment, journeys that take 20 minutes today will take over an hour in 2020. So devolving transport funds to York would provide the ancient city with the tools it needs for a modern transport infrastructure that fits the demands of this 21st century. Also, I'll just touch on this, Sir David, because I know other people want to come in, but if we're really going to put wings under our devolution project, we must also need to devolve funding for our local airports. And as many Yorkshire colleagues will agree, it's essential that access to Leeds Bradford Airport, one of the fastest growing airports in the country, is greatly improved. And we have to get rail links in there, not just road links there where we are at the moment. And again, devolution can really put the wings under that airport and move it forward, as they say. As such, Sir David, we need that long-term approach to funding with a detailed rail link into the airport, as I say. However, clearly the possibilities offered by devolution have the potential to be transformative. They really do for many of our cities, but also our rural communities. But we must make sure that it percolates right the way through across our great country, empowering rural communities and cities like York, leaving nowhere behind. And it must not just be about the metropolitan centres. I will give way briefly.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's talking about the devolution to cities, but would he also agree with me that it's extremely important that we remember the counties that are further away from the cities, such as Cumbria?
Julian Sturdy.
I entirely agree with my honourable friend, and as I was saying, we must make, if devolution is to truly work, it has to make sure that it percolates right the way through, leaving no area or no community unaffected. We have to make sure it gets right across the country into our rural communities and not just the metropolitan elite as we see it at the moment. So that, for me, and I'll finish on this point, Sir David, so that actually when you're talking about devolution, very briefly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's talking about devolution, and he's mentioned the rural communities there, and I agree with that. I come from a rural community. But how does that link to the Metro Mayor's concept? Are the Metro Mayor's concept as appropriate to somewhere like Oxfordshire as it is to somewhere like York?
Well, I think we have to, as I say, if devolution is to truly work across the country, and we don't end up by leaving communities behind and actually widening the divide from metropolitan cities to our rural communities, we have to make sure that that link does work. And I look forward to what the Minister is going to say on that, and I'm sure he is going to come up with many arguments of why rural communities should be reconnected. I know that it will affect his constituency and the north as much as it affects mine and the great county of Yorkshire. But as I say, if we are, when I talk just specifically on this point, Sir David, and I finish on this, if we are to talk about Yorkshire and the City of York, if the rural communities that surround York are to play that leading role in devolution, we have to make sure that it gets right to the heart of them. And if we can achieve that, we can make sure that all communities play a leading role in what I would argue delivers, for my area, delivers a Yorkshire powerhouse to rival that of Manchester and London. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Sir David. What a pleasure it is to see you back in your place after the election. And I thank the honourable gentleman, the member for Southport, for securing this important debate. I also welcome the Minister, my relatively parliamentary neighbour, as it were, to his place on the front bench, and I hope that he'll be working in the interests of Teesside and the wider North East. And this debate is a good opportunity to start probing the Minister on what he will do for our area. I wish to make, in my brief time, Sir David, 4 very quick points. First and foremost, something which was started by the honourable gentleman over the course of his excellent opening in today's debate. The government is trying to show its enthusiasm for devolution and letting go of power to local areas by insisting on a one-size-fits-all approach to governance. Areas can have further devolution, but only if it adopts the government's way. Now, Sir David, that seems a pretty odd way of devolving power to local areas in order to ensure that local wishes and circumstances prevail. How on earth, if devolution is properly chosen by the government, how on earth can the Minister justify this? Following on from this, Sir David, my second point is that the government, in adopting this approach, is disregarding in a very significant way the wishes of local people. It seems a fundamental principle in British politics that if there is a significant change in the model in which people are governed, those people affected should be allowed a say. Indeed, the House at this very moment, Sir David, is debating the second reading of the EU referendum bill. The principle has been true on a national level, in terms of the referendum in 2011 to change the parliamentary electoral system. It's been true at regional level, such as the referendum in 2004 in my own region of the North East to determine or not whether we have a regional assembly. Significantly, it's also been true at a local level in my own constituency. In 2001, the electorate of Hartlepool decided in a referendum that they wanted a mayoral system of governance at a local level, and they elected a monkey. In 2012, after a decade of a directly elected mayor, the good people of Hartlepool decided in another referendum they'd had enough of that and rejected the model. So given that my constituents in recent years have had their say on local models of governance and the ones in which they prefer, in particular the rejection of a mayoral model, why are their views being so obviously ignored by the government? My third point, Sir David, is something raised eloquently by the honourable gentleman. Much of the economic drive in future decades will be fuelled by cities, but by no means all. In my own area of the North East, Newcastle is a superb city. I used to work there. My eldest son is at university there. I want to see Newcastle thrive. It's in the region's interests for that city to thrive. But I can see my honourable friend for Houghton and Sunderland South here in the debate. What about Sunderland and Nissan? What about closer to home in terms of Teesside area and the great manufacturing firms that are there. City regions aren't going to be the sole drivers. And what is the Minister going to do to make sure that smaller towns and cities, such as Hartlepool, indeed such as Stockton, will be able to benefit from this area? I think this is incredibly important. Can the Minister also confirm that the combined authority for Teesside is working well? Those local authorities are working adequately together and can work together. There's no need for a change in governance. So can he discount here and now a Metro Mayor for Tees Valley? My fourth and final brief point, Sir David, relates to the matters that could be devolved. I would wish to see economic development, regeneration, skills and transport be devolved, but I would also hope to see health matters devolved properly too. My constituents and I want to see hospital services return to Hartlepool. I know the Minister will know about this issue all too well, but my constituents feel powerless in making sure that happens. Surely devolution, real devolution, allows local people to feel empowered. Now, of course, clinical safety has to be paramount. Medical advice has to be prioritised, but decisions on hospital services are made by the NHS Foundation Trust, which do not have the support of the local population. Hartlepool Borough Council, regardless of political affiliation, are against the changes. I want to see hospital services return to Hartlepool, but there's a lack of real devolution, power and accountability at a local level. The people of Hartlepool don't feel like they're being listened to. So if we are to have real devolution and accountability, that should always include public services vital to the people of an area. And there's no bigger public service vital to the people of an area than the NHS. So will the Minister say something as to how local people can have real say about this? Sir David, certainly.
Mr. John Howe. I wonder whether he would agree with me that the big prize is not just in transferring the NHS services, it's actually linking up the NHS with social care, so that they're all under one roof and the decisions can be made about both at the same time.
I think, Sir David, the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. And that integration in terms of making sure that local authorities are working in conjunction with different parts of the NHS, which are often very silo in approach, is absolutely the key to make sure that my constituency, as well as his own, gets the best possible health and social care. Finally, Sir David, I just want to summarise by saying the people in my area would like more power over their future and their destiny. But the model proposed by the government is rigid and fixed according to its own agenda rather than that of local areas. I know the Minister knows our part of the world incredibly well. I hope he will show some flexibility in allowing proper devolution.
Mr. Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure, Stephen, for chairing under your chairmanship, and I also pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman for Southport for securing this debate. I will try to be brief because I agree with an awful lot of what my honourable friend, the member for Outer York, has already said, particularly his references to the great county of Yorkshire. But I want to talk just briefly about devolution in the Humber and some concerns we have with the way that may go. But also, I would start by expressing my support for the government agenda to devolve more powers down. I know the Minister is shocked that I am supporting the government line, but this is a new Parliament and we're all ambitious. Yes, ambitious, but anyway. But I'd spent 10 years as a local councillor in the Humber on Hull City Council. My friend who was here next to me for Cleethorpes until a moment ago spent 26 years on the council in North East Lincolnshire, or the precursor to that council. And actually, I think our experiences as local councillors over that period were actually, under any government, of a period of centralisation of power to Westminster, a lack of trust between central government and local government. And if something did come out to local government, or an extra power, or funding, it always came with strings attached. You were told how to spend it, and inevitably the money ran out at some point, but you still had to continue doing it. So actually I want to pay tribute to this government for being the first government in a long time to actually at least now be talking about devolving powers and taking them away from here. For me, as a proud Englishman as well as a Yorkshireman, the current structures will never work. As somebody who believes in a federal Britain, I don't believe we can ever rightly write the constitutional settlement that we have, given the powers that the Scottish Parliament has and the Welsh Assembly in Northern Ireland. And I would echo the concerns my honourable friend has said with regards to regional airports. And although the Scotland Bill is going through, and we will be voting on that at the committee stage on on Monday, it is a concern that air passenger duty, for example, is going to be devolved down to Scotland, well, to airports in the north of England. There is a real risk there. So, although devolution to local government and on the structures that have been proposed is to be welcomed, it does not, in my view, right the constitutional settlement that the Scotland bill will make actually a lot worse for constituents in England. But that's a debate for elsewhere. I would agree with some of the comments that have been made about not trying to be too prescriptive, although I noted, I think, the surprise by the two honourable gentlemen about the idea that central government would demand something that's fixed and rigid. This should not be a shock to anybody who's been here or in local government. That is generally the way of things. But I would, however, concur with what has been said. We don't want to see imposed on the Humber a solution. And what I would say to the Minister is, whilst I represent an area that is served by 3 local enterprise partnerships who are all doing a job, different jobs, but they're doing them very well. But we don't want to see a return of Humberside, and we don't want to see a metro mayor for the great city of Hull. Hull is a fantastic city. It's going to be City of Culture in 2017. It's really important to our region. But my constituents in the East Riding of Yorkshire, out in Goole and on the south bank of the Humber in North Lincolnshire, don't want to be part of a governance structure with Humberside. And actually, I think the government position is that nothing will be imposed against the will of the people, and that will be a reassurance to my constituents who are very concerned at the idea that anybody would try to recreate Humberside. The final point I'm trying to keep within 3 or 4 minutes, just say to the Minister that if local authorities come forward with radical and innovative solutions. There are 2 particular questions and assurances I would like. One is that regional boundaries won't be a barrier to that. I represent North Lincolnshire, which is in the Yorkshire and the Humber region, but very much sees itself as part of Lincolnshire, because it is, of course, part of the great county of Lincolnshire. And if it wishes to pair with any of its district authorities to the south of it, which are in a different region, they're technically in the East Midlands, although in North Lincolnshire we have far more in common with Lincolnshire than we might do with West Yorkshire or even York. Then regional barriers mustn't be a barrier to that. But also it also says where you have unitary authorities that are wanting to work with district councils, where there are also county councils, which is the situation in Lincolnshire. In North Lincolnshire, we're a unitary. In Lincolnshire proper, as you might call it, it's still a district and county model. We might have a problem where district councils agree, but county councils don't agree to the structures. And although I understand the desire for us all to proceed on the basis of agreement, districts and counties have a history of disagreeing with each other on pretty much everything, and I would hope that the Minister would be able to outline a way in which, where a district wishes to partner with a unitary authority, the county council can't have an absolute veto on that, and I'll end on that.
Order. 12 minutes to share between 3 colleagues before the winds up. Simon Danchuk. Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and let me thank my honourable friend from Southport for the debate that is generated. I'd actually like to start by saying that I'm wholly in favour of devolution, but I wanted to start also by quoting Charles Kennedy, who got it exactly right when he said, "I want to see far more decisions taken far closer to the patients, the passengers and the pupils, far more power for locally and regionally elected politicians who understand best the needs of their areas." I couldn't have put it better myself, a very wise gentleman who will certainly be missed. But one of the key issues about devolution is around funding. And what we've seen in the last 5 years under the last government is finance being reduced to local government by some 37%. And if that's the way that this government is going to go, by passing powers down through the bills that are being proposed, but cutting the funding, then that's wholly unacceptable. What we have to be able to do is give these localities the ability and the power to be able to collect the money that they require. And I think that's an important point. Having said that, I do support and welcome the extra powers that are in the city's devolution bill. I welcome what that can provide to Greater Manchester. Though I would also add a note of caution, which is also already being touched upon, and it's this point about the focus too much being on cities themselves rather than smaller towns. And I think that's important. If you look at Rochdale, for example, we're very much on the periphery of Manchester itself, and whilst the city of Manchester serves Rochdale well, there are also some disadvantages
consequences attached with that. And what this bill needs to do is ensure that the powers that are passed down give equal weight to the peripheral towns, not just in Greater Manchester, but also perhaps into South Lancashire, East Lancashire as well. So that's certainly worth bearing in mind, because there are inequalities not just between regions, which are fairly obvious, but there are also inequalities between sub-regions within the region themselves. Unlike my honourable friend from Southport, I am in favour of directly elected mayors and metro mayors. I do believe that they provide greater accountability, more decisive action, and a visual local champion that the people can get behind and support. Finally, I would like to say that there are a good number of good people coming forward within Greater Manchester who are hoping to stand to be the Metro Mayor for the City region. I can advise honourable members who would like a flutter that I am 20 to 1 and my good wife Karen is 33 to 1. I won't comment on which is the better bet. Thank you, sir.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Sir David. First of all, I want to recognise what the government is doing and welcoming it. I think it's a recognition of the failure of more than 70 years of centralisation. And what is being proposed by the government may not be completely perfect. There may be warts on it, there may be difficulties with it, but it is the first real reversal within England of centralisation really since the Second World War. So in that it is to be welcomed. Secondly, and some of the comments that have been made from the honourable member from Southport and other people, it is very easy to find some of the faults in it. It is very easy to argue about boundaries. It is very easy to argue about consistency between different areas, to say that the shires won't do as well as the cities. I have to say that one of the problems that has bedeviled those of us who've argued for decentralisation over the last, in my case, over the last third of a century, has been that nobody can agree on boundaries. Nobody can agree on a consistent view that Cornwall is very different from Kent, which is very different from Manchester, which is very different from Birmingham. And I think each area has to argue their case for what is appropriate for Cheshire or for Kent, rather than to look to central government to impose a uniform system across the whole country. That is what devolution really should mean. If we try to do as they did in the early 70s, find a completely homogeneous system, we will end up with no change whatsoever. The third point I want to make is about the sort of municipal Mussolinis that the honourable member from Southport mentioned. I think his argument was deficient, quite frankly. He says there is no empirical basis for this. What is different about this country compared to the democracies in Europe, compared to the North American democracies, is that all those democracies in essence, have elected mayors. They might be the strong mayor type, the weak mayor model, or variations of those models. They may be mayors of tiny villages that nobody's ever heard of in the middle of France. But the mayoral model is well understood, and there is a huge empirical basis. And those people who argue against the mayoral basis have to answer this. Is the system of local government that has grown up in this country, originally based on committees and leaders that were elected, now with scrutiny committees and executive members, is that there is no empirical basis that shows that that is better than elected mayors? I don't think there is. And I agree with my honourable friend from Rochdale. The advantage of a mayor is that it's a fundamental democratic advantage of transparency and accountability. Take this city of London. People know who is responsible for transport in this city. It is the mayor, in a way that they often don't know their local councillor or their local leader of the council, who is elected by a secondary legislation. So if democracy means anything, which means that you understand who's taking your decisions on your behalf because they are elected, and that you can throw that person out if you don't like them, then I think the mayoral model is well.
I just want to finish on this point. There is a huge amount to be said about this area. I welcome the proposals for Greater Manchester as a Greater Manchester Member of Parliament. I think, having looked at the Cities and Local Government and Devolution Bill, there is still areas for improvement and clarification. I don't see why the Deputy Mayor should have to be a leader of a council and why that person cannot come from a different sector altogether as they do in London. I think that's an unnecessary restriction. I am interested why the transfer of transport powers so that we can re-regulate the buses in Greater Manchester. It is necessary to have them in a separate bill, and I worry about that. I want to see what's in that bill to make sure we will get a good deal. And I agree with my honourable friend from Hartlepool that the real bonus that we can have from devolution is to integrate health and social care and get decisions on hospitals and the rest of healthcare taken locally, preferably by this message. So overall, I think the government are on the right track, and there is some detail that can be got right, and it is to be welcomed.
Phillips.
Thank you, Sir David. I appreciate time is short, so I'll try and get through my remarks as quickly as possible. There's huge potential in the North East for economic growth, but if the last 5 years have taught us anything, it's that our region sees disproportionate funding cuts, and what we need to see is a fairer deal from this government this time around. Any talk of regional devolution has to go hand in hand with action to tackle this unfair funding imbalance. And although I welcome the Chancellor's belated recognition that the North doesn't end at Manchester or Leeds by incorporating the North East into his plans, his proposed settlement on devolution for our region is deeply flawed. Devolution should mean empowering local regions to decide best how to spend their resources in order to nurture economic growth. Indeed, the Chancellor has himself promised to give local authorities the levers they need to grow the local economy and make sure local people keep the rewards. But under his current proposals, only areas with a directly elected mayor will be given such levers, and devolution by diktat seems a strange form of empowerment to me. The government may believe that directly elected mayors represent the best means of ensuring accountability on devolved decision-making, but ministers have yet to fully make that case as to why they believe that to be true, and I'm sceptical as to whether local voters will agree with them. People in the North East should be given the opportunity to make that decision for themselves, and forcing them to accept devolution on the government's own terms is no devolution at all. Sunderland and Newcastle have previously rejected directly elected mayors in referenda. We had the 2004 Regional Assembly referendum, which was very clear. If that opposition remains, why should the North East and the communities I represent be denied the benefits that devolution will bring, especially as we know that the North East Combined Authority has made significant progress in a short space of time, not least on local transport matters, where plans to re-regulate local buses are underway through the Quality Contract Scheme, a change that I've long campaigned for and supported. I welcome the member for Stockton South to his new role, and I'm pleased that he, at least, has recognised that a one-size-fits-all approach to devolution of regional powers is flawed. But if, as he says, the so-called Northern Powerhouse is not a proposal to force a uniform model on everyone, why has the Chancellor gone on record to say that he will settle for nothing less than elected mayors? Which is it? If the government is serious about creating an economic powerhouse that encapsulates all of the North, local people must be given the freedom to determine their own destiny, free from prescription or interference from Whitehall. The government's proposals, in their current form, will deny the people of the North East that opportunity.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Sir David. I have watched this debate with great interest, really, more as an observer than wishing to seek to impose any kind of views, because as an SNP member from Scotland and as a former local councillor, I think it's important that local areas take the decisions for themselves and that they understand what best would suit their needs. It's interesting to watch the debate around the city deals for England, because in Scotland we have a city deal for Scotland in Glasgow, in the area that I represent, which is a partnership of 8 local authorities from Glasgow and the surrounding areas, and it has not had a prescriptive mayor imposed upon that, because that's not part of the Scottish local government tradition to have an elected mayor. Indeed, in Glasgow we have a political head in the leader of the council, and we have a civic head in the Lord Provost, and those two roles are separate and are understood that way. And I can well see the points of conflict between urban areas, which may suit a mayor slightly better, and rural areas, which for different reasons may not. And it'll be interesting to watch and to see what comes out of this debate, because in Scotland we do have very diverse areas as well. We have within our 32 local authorities, we have the City of Glasgow with around 600,000, and Clackmannanshire, which is only around 50,000 of a population, both as local authorities set up in broadly the same way. But in Scotland, certainly, devolution is working well. The powers that the Scottish Parliament have been used to represent local demands and to set a separate course for Scotland where we think things could be done in a particularly Scottish way for the benefit of our people. So I'm watching with great interest, and I think the debate around this has a lot to run, a lot of detail yet to come out of it. But I would certainly agree that it's important to have, if you're giving local areas powers, the finance ought to come as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Southport on securing this very important debate. And perhaps I can start by being very clear that Labour supports devolution to cities, counties and communities in every part of the United Kingdom. And there's a very simple reason for this. Decisions are better if they're taken closer to the people they affect. Governments of every political colour in the past have been too centralising. It's one of the reasons people have lost trust in politics. Power feels too remote, too unaccountable, too disconnected from people's everyday lives and everyday concerns. The time has come to get power out of Whitehall and into the hands of people up and down the country. The previous coalition government claimed to be localist, but the evidence tells a very different story. And I speak as somebody who, until I was elected to this place in December 2012, was leading a reasonably high-profile council. Education was centralised in Whitehall, with civil servants and national ministers taking decisions about where schools would be built and who would run them. There was little, if any, engagement with parents, local communities or local government, and as a result, mistakes were made. The government told councils how and when they should empty bins, how they could communicate with local residents, how much council tax they could charge. They told councils what level of financial reserves they should hold to cover known risks, and then denounced them for not spending the same money on the day-to-day services that they had to operate. I even had one letter from a minister telling me how the council should organise street parties and where they should be organised. Now we have a new government also claiming it will devolve and decentralise. It sounds good, but the omens are less good. We've just had our first sight of the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill, but it doesn't include any proposals for devolving any specific powers. Devolution needs to be on offer to every part of the country. It should benefit every city region and not just Greater Manchester. It should benefit towns and county regions too, and not just our major urban areas. And devolution shouldn't stop at the town hall. Tenants need more control over the homes they rent. Patients need more control over the health and care services they use. Parents need more control over the schools their children attend. Unemployed people need more control over the support on offer to help them get back to work. This should be about handing power to the people. Fundamentally, devolution can't work without a fair funding settlement or longer-term funding deals. And as the Honourable Member for Rochdale was saying, the areas that are being identified for devolution are those that have suffered the greatest level of cuts. This is setting areas up to fail, and it feeds my concern, and I know it's a concern that is shared by many others, that the primary thing the government wants to localise is the blame for cuts they've made in Whitehall. But perhaps the starkest contradiction of all is the fact that devolution is only on offer if it comes with an elected mayor. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has said he will not impose this model on anyone, but nor will he settle for less. Now, surely localism means trusting local people to take decisions for themselves, not having to rely on the occupant of number 11 Downing Street. Can the Minister tell us why the government feels devolution needs to be accompanied by a mayor? Does he not think that combined authorities are capable of finding a model of governance that is acceptable to the people they represent? Why is the government choosing to put forward only one model with a take-it-or-leave-it offer designed in Whitehall. There's nothing localist about doing it that way. Labour wants to see much more devolution and decentralisation. It's Labour-run cities that are at the forefront of this devolution agenda. Combined authorities need a wide range of powers to create jobs, build homes, keep communities healthy and provide support to those who need it most. But there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. That doesn't work. And the government should not be putting barriers in the way of parts of the country that want more devolution. Why doesn't the government give local people a choice? You can't end the culture of Whitehall knows best by letting Whitehall override the preferences of areas that want more devolution but want to choose how they are governed. Why is the government denying local areas that choice? I hope the Minister will tell us now that he is ready to think again.
Mr. John Stevens.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. He's absolutely right that local people should be involved in devolution and the right to take powers to them. At present, if you want to have a referendum and an elected mayor locally, you need 5% of the population to sign a petition. Would you be agreeable to see that reduced to, say, 1 or 2%, given the fact that you want local people to be making decisions?
Well, my view of localism is that we need to allow more of those decisions to be taken by the local authorities or the local combined authorities in the areas that they're seeking to represent. The key point is it shouldn't be the Minister that is determining these things on behalf of those people. He can't claim to be localist while imposing decisions on local communities.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Southport for securing a debate which is clearly of such interest to colleagues from across the House. We've had many contributions raising a range of issues, a number of which are fundamental to how the bill, when it comes forward, the Local Government Cities and Devolution Bill, is going to work, but a number of which feed directly into the concerns that honourable members understandably have at the early stages of this debate, and which I hope I will be able to address on the whole in my comments now. The Honourable Member for Southport accused me of the reversal of Thatcherism, of the recreation of metropolitan counties. These are not things that I'm often accused of, nor things that I expected to be accused of in my first appearance as a minister in a Conservative majority government, and they are not things, I'm sure he will not be surprised to hear, that I agree with. We are not recreating the metropolitan counties, Sir David. They were cumbersome, they were bureaucratic, they were large organisations which had layers of bureaucracy that often conflicted with themselves. Instead, we are looking to do what we can to transfer powers down to people in a sensible and efficient way, to do what we can to build on combined authorities by empowering them to make decisions more locally, to make decisions more quickly, and to tailor those decisions to the needs of the communities that they serve. The accusation has been made that we are going to create metro Mussolinis. Well, nothing, Sir David, could be further from the truth, and I want to address some of the concerns which honourable members have raised in the debate this afternoon. One of the issues that has been raised, it was raised by the honourable member for Southport, was the uniformity of approach, the Procrustean approach to devolving powers. Again, this is not what is the intention of the government, nor is it what is contained in the legislation that we hope to bring forward. We are looking to have bespoke deals. We are saying to areas, tell us what works for you. Tell us what the geographic area that works for you looks like. Tell us what the powers that will work for you are. Come to the government and make a deal with us that will help you to grow your local economy, to deliver better services for local people, but that fundamentally will allow you to play a part in the Northern Powerhouse project that this government is bringing forward, in the rebalancing of our economy so that the north of England can grow at the rate which it should be able to expect to grow, and that we can see the success that London and the south has enjoyed over many years replicated across the country as a whole. Yes, of course I'll give way.
I thank the Minister very much for giving way, and I wonder if he can comment on the feeling in the Midlands somewhat, that we're somewhat left out by this talk of a northern powerhouse. When we're home to 10 million people, when we're the sort of beating heart in terms of manufacturing, does he understand that there is some concern that we don't appear to be maximising ministerial favour and interest when all this talk is of the north versus the south?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. The talk is, of course, not of the North versus the South. It's about how the rest of the country can catch up with some of the successes that have been realised in the South over not just recent but many years. And indeed, the Midlands has just as important a part to play in that process. We saw the Chancellor in the Midlands not very long ago talking about the Midlands engine and what we're able to deliver there. And devolution can work for the Midlands just as it can for the North. The majority of comments today from honourable members attending the debate have been from members for northern constituencies. But by no means does this mean that the bill would only apply to those areas. It would provide opportunities to the country as a whole. But I want to address this issue, this accusation of a uniformity approach, of prescription. That is not what this bill does. That is not what the government is proposing. What the government is proposing is to go to each area and find out what would work for that area. The legislation that we want to bring forward is enabling legislation, Sir David. It will allow those different, tailored approaches to be delivered where they are needed and in ways that have local agreement. One area that has been raised, and honourable members have raised some concerns about, is that of the Metro Mayor model. And the question has been asked, why is the Metro Mayor something that the government has been clear we want to require as part of the devolution package for some of these city areas? If you want the big devolution deal that places like Manchester are getting, it is absolutely true that a Metro Mayor is a requirement of the government as part of that package, and the legislation enables but does not require that to happen. That is because we're talking about a wholesale transfer of powers right down to a much more local level in a way that has not been done by government in this country for generations. We've seen power move away from local communities by successive governments of different party political colours, and we want to reverse that trend. We want to say, what can you do better locally, what do you need, and what can we deliver for you? But with that, there must be accountability and responsibility. The mayoral model has been shown to work all over the world, and a directly elected, accountable individual is an important part of that. Of course, I'll give way to the lady.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Can he just clarify, in terms of the North East, where we already have a North East Combined Authority, will a Metro Mayor be conditional on devolution of further powers? I'm just a bit unclear. On the one hand, he's saying it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. On the other hand, he's saying it is, because you must have a Metro Mayor.
I'm happy to clarify to the extent that I can for the Honourable Lady, because it depends what those areas that want to take part in this devolution process want to get from it. If they want the Manchester model, if they want the exciting package of powers that we're looking to already delivering to the greater Manchester area, then a mayor will be a requirement of it. That is something that we in the government believe needs to happen and we will insist on. If they want something less, then we can have a discussion about what that something less might look like. But yes, fundamentally, if areas want to push ahead with the sort of devolution package that areas like Greater Manchester are already in line to get, then a mayor will be a requirement of that process. It will be part of that deal. We've also had... I'll give way to Honourable Southport.
John Pugh. What's the interesting point? I mean, the Minister has repeated some of the mantras I think we've heard before on this subject, but quite genuinely, what I want to know is, why is it impossible, in the government's mind, it's got to be impossible for it to be a prescription. You know, if it's a Metro Mayor, then it means that you don't think other things will work. Why is it impossible to have a level of devolution similar to that on offer at Manchester given to a combined authority? What is the lack of capacity that a combined authority have got that a Metro Mayor has?
The Honourable Member will, I'm sure, recognise that combined authorities are made up of individuals that, whilst elected in their own respective local authority areas, are not directly elected by the totality of the people that they are there to serve. And it's that democratic accountability that we're trying to deliver with this model and that we're prescribing. I'll give away one final time, but I must make progress.
The answer to that is, if there is that, if it's to make things more accountable to the public, and it's in order to serve the public better to have one accountable person, why will one not give the public a chance to decide whether they wanted that template in the first place?
Minister.
The Honourable Member will be aware that local authorities already have the power to bring into force, in bringing into place mayors, and local authority mayors are different to what is being proposed with the Metro Mayor model. They already have that power without referendums. What this government is proposing, what we're trying to do, is to give combined authorities that same power to deliver that accountability for those larger areas and that directly accountable individual that local people can hold to account. I want to move on to touch on a number of other areas that honourable members have raised, including the question of whether this is just a project for cities. A number of honourable members, including an honourable friend member for York Outer, the honourable member for Carlisle, the honourable member for Rochdale, for Hartlepool, for Brigg and Goole, have raised the issue of whether counties count too. And the answer is, of course, they do. This is an enabling bill which will allow us to tailor packages for different areas right across the country. We want to see cities succeed. Cities can be drivers of growth, but counties contribute a huge amount to our economy as well. And we want to see those areas come forward and make deals and find devolution settlements that work for them. So this absolutely is a commitment from the government, not just to pursue devolution for cities, but for counties as well. And the Honourable Member for Brigham Gould also asked about boundaries. This is a bottom-up process. And I would say to my honourable friend that if there are proposals that come forward from local areas, both for the powers they want and the areas that they want them to apply to, then we are open to listening to them and making that deal with them. And we want local areas to come forward with that approach. One of the issues that was also raised on the matter of what powers might be devolved was that of the health budget. And the Honourable Member for Henley made an important contribution on that issue, recognising the opportunity that arises where health and social care budgets can be brought together and the work that can be done locally to drive better provision of those sort of services. And that is something that is already being pursued in the Greater Manchester model. So, David, this is an opportunity that the government is bringing forward to rebalance our economy, to drive that northern powerhouse, but also to drive economic growth across the country as a whole, to transfer powers away from Whitehall in a way that will have accountability at a local level, but will allow local areas to better, more quickly make decisions, to tailor them to their needs, and to grow their economies to the benefits of us all.
Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
Thank you very much indeed.
Grand Committee Room ident. 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 Grand Committee Room ident.